The city was still half asleep when Marcus sat on the cold, cracked pavement, hugging his worn jacket tighter around his thin frame. The street lamps flickered as if unsure whether the day was coming or retreating, casting long shadows that twisted across the wet sidewalk. He stared at the empty road ahead, his eyes sharp, scanning every corner without moving a muscle. People walked past, unaware of the silent figure watching from the shadows. Some glanced at him with pity, some with disgust, and a few crossed to the other side, whispering. Marcus did not react. He had learned long ago that the world offered neither mercy nor kindness freely, and every glance carried a hidden danger. A distant siren wailed and echoed through the narrow alleyways, drawing Marcus's attention. He had seen police cars before, and his instincts told him to stay still, to observe, to wait. They were coming closer, their tires scraping against the asphalt, headlights cutting through the fog that clung stubbornly to the street. He noticed the way the officers moved, their steps deliberate, their hands hovering near their belts. Marcus's heart did not race. It had beaten faster in more dangerous places, on faraway battlefields where one wrong movement could mean the difference between life and death. As the police approached, their voices became audible, sharp and questioning, demanding. Marcus did not flinch. He did not smile. He simply looked at them with calm eyes, as if weighing their every action. The taller of the two cops leaned in, a sneer forming on his face. Hey, man, what are you doing here? You don't look like you belong on these streets. Marcus's voice was low but steady, just sitting. Just waiting. He did not elaborate. He did not explain. The officers exchanged glances, frustration mounting. One of them stepped closer, his boot tapping the pavement, a rhythm meant to intimidate. Marcus's fingers brushed against the strap of his worn bag, and though it held nothing threatening, the motion was precise, measured. There was a subtle alertness in the way he moved, the way he breathed, an invisible tension that most people could not see but instinctively felt. The younger officer laughed, a hollow, mocking sound. You're just a bum, right? You don't scare anyone. His words were meant to provoke, to make Marcus flinch, to break the calm he carried like armor. But Marcus did not react. His eyes never left theirs. Instead, they swept across the street, noting exits, observing shadows, measuring distance. The quiet power of someone who had faced life and death situations was palpable, though hidden beneath his worn coat and unkempt hair. A pigeon flapped nearby, startled by the tension in the air, and Marcus watched it fly away. He thought about the battlefields he had left behind, the missions that had tested him, the friends he had lost. Each memory was a weight he carried silently, each moment a reminder that survival required patience and vigilance. Here, in the middle of a quiet street with two men approaching aggressively, those skills mattered just as much. Perhaps even more. The taller officer reached out suddenly, as if to grab him. Marcus did not move, but his posture shifted subtly, a tiny adjustment that was invisible to an untrained eye. His gaze sharpened, and for a brief second, the world seemed to hold its breath. The younger cop noticed a flicker of something in Marcus's eyes, a calmness, yes, but also a warning. He could not place it, could not name it, but it made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Marcus smiled faintly, not a friendly gesture, but a quiet signal that he was aware of every intention, every movement, every possible threat. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, as if the city itself was holding its breath. The officers shuffled their feet, unsure of what to do next. They had expected compliance, fear, maybe even resistance, but not this quiet strength, not this unreadable calm. Marcus's mind wandered briefly to a time when he had to be this calm for hours at a time, waiting for a single shot to make the difference between life and death. That patience, that focus, was now his shield. Without warning, a dog barked in the distance, breaking the tension for a moment. The younger officer laughed nervously, but Marcus remained still, his gaze fixed. He could feel their doubt, their uncertainty. And though he said nothing, he projected a presence that demanded caution. Every gesture he made, every blink, every slight movement of his shoulders, was a silent reminder that he was not ordinary. The officers did not know who they were facing. A shadow moved across the wall behind Marcus, unnoticed by the cops, but not by him. He turned his head slowly, as if reading the invisible lines of the street, the hidden pathways of danger and safety. He had learned to read these signs long before he had ever seen them in a city like this. The officers continued their questioning, their voices rising slightly, tension growing. Marcus finally shifted, just a little, enough to remind them that he was awake, aware, and fully capable of reacting. And then, without a word, Marcus tilted his head slightly, a subtle signal to the world that he was not just a man on the streets. He was someone who had survived far greater dangers, someone whose calm was earned through unimaginable trials. The cops did not yet realize the lethal skill that lay dormant in him, the sharp mind that calculated every move, the steady hand that had once changed the course of life and death on a battlefield. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a pale light over the wet pavement. The officers took another step closer, still unaware. Marcus leaned back slightly, his eyes never leaving theirs, and for the first time, a faint smirk appeared on his lips, not from amusement, but from the quiet knowledge that the moment of reckoning was near, though they could not see it coming. Every breath he took, every subtle movement, was a silent warning. He did not need to act yet, not now. Patience was his ally, observation his weapon. And in that quiet, cold dawn, on a street where few noticed the details, Marcus waited, ready for whatever would come next. The sound of distant gunfire echoed in Marcus's mind as he closed his eyes for a brief moment, though the street around him was quiet. The memory hit him like a storm, dragging him back to a time when every heartbeat mattered, when every second could mean life or death. He was no longer the man the cops saw on the street. He was on a desert battlefield, crouched behind shattered concrete, rifle in hand, waiting for a single target that could save his team, or doom them all. Marcus remembered the sun burning over the barren land, the smell of dust and smoke mixing in the air. He could feel the weight of his sniper rifle, the rhythm of his breathing, the pulse of tension that ran through his body. His team had been pinned down for hours, outnumbered, with enemy forces closing in. Every nerve was alert. Every sound mattered. A distant movement, a faint rustle, the whisper of sand across metal, he noticed everything. His mind had always worked in a precise way during missions, calculating angles, distances, and timing down to fractions of a second. In that moment, he was not just a soldier, he was a guardian. His finger hovered near the trigger, steady, almost casual to anyone watching. But inside, every thought was focused on protecting those who relied on him. One wrong shot, one hesitation, and it could cost lives. He saw his friend, Corporal Hayes, trapped behind debris, struggling to reload. Marcus's eyes tracked the enemy's movement, calculating the perfect moment. He took a breath, aimed, and fired. The bullet found its mark, silent to anyone except those trained to notice. Hayes had a chance to move, to survive. Marcus had saved him. And in that instant, the battlefield had recognized him, not just as a sniper, but as someone deadly precise, someone whose calm under fire was unmatched. But survival came at a cost. He remembered the screams, the smoke, the friends he couldn't save. Faces flashed in his mind, fallen comrades, people he had promised to protect, and failed to. That memory was heavier than any rifle or medal. He had carried the weight of their loss silently, in every action, every choice he made afterward. It was the reason he rarely spoke of his past, why he had left the army quietly, disappearing from a world that could not understand the battles he fought in silence. Returning to the present, Marcus opened his eyes and scanned the street again. The cops were still there, unaware of the storm that lay beneath his calm exterior. They saw a homeless man, thin and unarmed. They did not see the soldier, the sniper, the man who had stared death in the eye and walked away. The memory of that battlefield sharpened his senses. Every shadow, every movement, every sound around him now had meaning. He knew how to react, how to survive, and how to make those who underestimated him regret it without a single violent act if needed. He thought about the streets he now walked, the cold pavement beneath him, the strangers who looked down on him. He had fought wars that tested his body and mind, and yet these streets were a different kind of battlefield, one filled with ignorance, fear, and misunderstanding. Marcus had learned patience in the desert sands, precision in the chaos of gunfire, and restraint in moments when action could mean tragedy. All those lessons now mattered, even here. The younger cop stepped closer again, unaware of the silent tension. Marcus's hand brushed lightly over the strap of his bag, not reaching for anything, just a small movement that reminded his mind of the calm drills he had practiced in the army. His breathing was steady. His gaze was unwavering. The officers thought they had power here, thought they could intimidate him, but Marcus's experience had taught him that patience often held more power than aggression. For a moment, he allowed himself a small smile, not at the cops, not at their arrogance, but at the quiet irony of the situation. Here he was, a man who had survived the deadliest missions, now facing threats from people who could not even perceive the danger they were brushing against. He had seen death, destruction, betrayal, and yet he remained alive, unchanged in his core. The streets were different, yes, but the skills, the calm, the sharpness, were still very much alive within him. Marcus remembered one last detail from that battlefield, the look in his team leaders' eyes when they knew he had saved them. That look was trust, pure and simple. And in this moment, Marcus knew he would need that same kind of trust in himself. Not trust from others, because the cops would never see it, but trust in his own awareness, his own skill, and his own restraint. He was prepared. He always had been. The distant hum of the city blended with his thoughts, pulling him back to the present. The officers were still speaking, still circling, still unaware. Marcus leaned back slightly, settling into his spot with the ease of someone who had spent countless hours waiting, watching, calculating. And as the first weak rays of dawn touched the street, Marcus felt a calm certainty. The man they thought they were confronting was not just a homeless figure, they were facing a mind and body trained to survive the unimaginable. And they had no idea what they were about to awaken. The two officers had circled Marcus slowly, their footsteps echoing against the empty street. Each movement was deliberate, meant to intimidate, but Marcus did not flinch. He sat back slightly, eyes calm yet alert, watching their every move. There was no fear in him, only quiet awareness, like a predator sizing up intruders who had no idea of the danger they invited. "Move along, buddy," the taller officer said, trying to sound commanding. "This isn't your place. You don't belong here." His voice carried authority, but Marcus could hear the tension beneath it, the uncertainty that came from facing someone unshaken by threats. "I'm right where I need to be," Marcus replied softly. His words were calm, almost casual, but his tone carried weight. Each syllable seemed measured, as if he had thought of every possible reaction. The officers exchanged a quick glance. This wasn't the usual response from someone they were trying to scare. The younger cop laughed nervously. "Come on, man. Don't act all high and mighty. You're just sitting here like a bum." He took a step closer, raising his hand slightly as if to push Marcus. Marcus's head tilted just a fraction, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly. That tiny movement was enough. The younger officer froze, just for a moment, feeling something he couldn't name. Marcus's gaze swept the area around them, calculating distances, noting cover, assessing exits. Every detail mattered. The city street seemed ordinary to anyone else, but to him, it was full of invisible lines, threats, and opportunities. He remembered the desert, the sniper positions, the seconds that determined life or death. That calm precision was still alive within him. "Are you deaf?" the taller officer snapped, clearly frustrated now. "I said move along." He stepped closer, towering over Marcus. Marcus did not flinch. He did not react. Instead, his eyes followed the movement, noting the angle of the taller man's stance, the slight shift in his balance. His fingers brushed his bag, not touching anything, just moving as naturally as breathing. The younger officer's confidence was faltering. Something about Marcus made him uneasy. It wasn't fear exactly, it was a sense that this man was far more capable than he looked. His posture, his calm, the way he seemed to read their intentions before they acted, it was unnerving. Marcus finally shifted slightly, a small motion almost invisible, but enough to reset the rhythm of the tension. He leaned forward a little, eyes locking onto the taller officers. "I don't want trouble," he said, voice steady. "But I won't let it find me either." The words were simple, yet each carried a quiet authority that could not be ignored. For a brief moment, silence fell over the street. Even the birds seemed to stop, the wind holding its breath. The officers hesitated, unsure of how to respond. They had expected fear, hesitation, maybe even submission, but not this. Marcus radiated control without aggression, and it was disorienting. The taller officer took a deep breath and stepped back slightly. "Look, we're just doing our job," he muttered, trying to regain authority. But the words rang hollow. Marcus had already observed their body language, their uncertainty, their overconfidence beginning to crack. He did not need to act violently to assert himself, the tension itself was his tool. Marcus's mind wandered briefly to the skills that had once kept him alive in war zones. Patience, observation, subtle movements, he relied on them now just as much as he had back then. Every twitch, every glance, every hesitation by the cops was another piece of information, and he filed it away silently. The younger officer shifted, clearly itching to do something impulsive. Marcus noticed it immediately. His gaze tightened, just enough to create an invisible boundary. The officer froze. Marcus did not raise his voice, did not make a threatening motion. He simply stared, a quiet confidence that was louder than any words could be. The taller officer tried again, his voice sharper this time. "Move along, or we'll make you." Marcus's lips curved slightly into a faint smirk, not of amusement, but of quiet warning. He didn't need to act. He had already demonstrated control without touching a weapon. The cops had no idea who they were really dealing with. Marcus leaned back fully now, crossing his arms loosely. His calm presence filled the space, making the air heavy. He could feel the officers' doubt, their irritation, their rising panic. The street had become a battlefield of perception. The cops thought they were in control, but Marcus had turned the invisible tide without a single move. Finally, the taller officer muttered something under his breath and glanced at his partner. Hesitation flickered in their eyes. Marcus's smirk remained subtle but telling. He didn't need to escalate, the quiet, deadly patience he carried did the work for him. Every second that passed reinforced the lesson, they were no longer in control, and they might not even understand it. Marcus's eyes swept the street one more time. The first weak rays of sunlight began to touch the pavement, glinting off puddles and broken glass. He remained still, watching, calculating, calm. The cops, still unaware, were trapped in a storm of tension that Marcus had created simply by existing, simply by being fully aware. And in that quiet morning, Marcus knew that the confrontation had only just begun, but the rules had already changed. Marcus shifted slightly, settling into a more comfortable position on the cold pavement. The tension in the air had not lifted, but he allowed himself a small moment to breathe. His eyes scanned the street, taking in the small details, the flicker of a neon sign, a loose brick near the curb, the distant sound of a car engine. Every detail mattered, every sound had meaning. The cops still didn't understand who they were dealing with, and that ignorance gave him a quiet advantage. For a moment, his mind wandered back to life before the streets, before the army. He remembered the small house he had grown up in, the smell of his mother's cooking, the laughter of his little sister echoing down the hall. That life seemed like another lifetime, fragile and distant. War had taken much from him, and the streets had taken the rest. But in those memories, Marcus found a strange kind of strength, a reminder of why he survived, why he endured, why he remained calm even when threatened. He thought about the soldiers he had lost, the friends who had relied on him and never returned home. Each face, each memory, was a weight he carried quietly. But that weight had taught him patience, precision, and restraint. It had taught him to wait, to watch, to act only when the moment was right. And now, on this quiet street, those lessons were more useful than ever. The officers moved again, their steps cautious but still probing. Marcus watched every twitch, every glance, every shift in balance. He could see their frustration building. They wanted control, they wanted compliance, but Marcus offered neither. Instead, he offered the calm of someone who had seen far worse, someone who had survived impossible situations and emerged unshaken. That calm was a weapon in itself, subtle but undeniable. A soft breeze blew down the street, rustling a few discarded papers near Marcus's feet. He noticed the sound immediately, reading the movement as he would a signal in combat. The world around him seemed alive with invisible threats, invisible lines that others could not perceive. And yet, he remained motionless, a quiet observer, aware of every possible outcome. Marcus's thoughts shifted to the cops again. He wondered if they understood even a fraction of what he had done in his past, if they could imagine the precision, the patience, the deadly focus that had once defined his life. They could not. And that ignorance gave him control, gave him an edge that he did not need to announce. The younger officer scratched his head nervously, looking at Marcus with an expression that mixed irritation and unease. The taller one muttered under his breath, clearly trying to find the right words, the right action to regain authority. But Marcus could see their hesitation, subtle cracks forming in their confidence. They were acting on assumption and ego, not awareness, and that was a dangerous combination for them. Marcus allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. It was not pride, not arrogance, it was a reminder to himself of the quiet power he held. He did not need to move, did not need to speak, did not need to react. Patience was his ally. Observation was his weapon. And soon, if they continued pressing, he would act, but only in the way that ensured he remained in full control. For a few seconds, silence enveloped the street. The city seemed distant, muffled, as if holding its breath alongside him. Marcus leaned back against the rough wall behind him, closing his eyes briefly, feeling the cool touch of the morning air. He was calm, but every sense was alert, every thought calculating. The confrontation was still unfolding, but he was already steps ahead, anticipating every move they might make. He thought again of the battlefield, of the long hours spent waiting, watching, calculating a single shot that could decide the fate of many lives. That patience had saved lives then, and it would guide him now. The cops did not know the stakes, did not know the discipline he carried silently beneath his calm exterior. They thought they were in control, but Marcus knew otherwise. The sun had risen slightly, casting weak light across the wet pavement. The glow reflected in Marcus's eyes, highlighting the calm intensity within them. The officers exchanged a glance, frustration and uncertainty mixed together. Marcus observed, understanding the unspoken tension between them, knowing exactly how to push and when to hold back. He did not need to escalate yet. The calm before the storm was his moment to gather advantage, to assert control silently, to prepare for whatever came next. And as he sat there, seemingly just another man on the street, Marcus smiled faintly to himself, a quiet, knowing smile. The storm had not yet arrived, but when it did, the officers would learn, far too late, that the man they underestimated was not just a homeless figure. He was a trained soldier, a sniper, and a mind sharper than they could imagine. And in that quiet street at dawn, Marcus waited, ready, patient, and in full command of the moment. The street was quiet except for the soft shuffle of shoes and the distant hum of morning traffic. Marcus's eyes never left the two officers. Every twitch of their hands, every shift in weight, every glance told him more than words ever could. He was calm, almost unnervingly so, but the quiet power in his presence made the officers uneasy. They still thought they had control, still thought they were the hunters, but Marcus was watching, calculating, always ahead. A sudden clatter echoed from a nearby alley, a metal trash can tipping over. The cops jumped slightly, instinctively turning toward the noise. Marcus didn't flinch. He merely tilted his head, observing, noting, analyzing. His military training had taught him to read every sound, every movement, every tiny detail. That clatter was nothing, yet he treated it as if it could be life or death. The officers, however, had no such awareness. Their reaction, sloppy and impulsive, revealed their lack of discipline. Marcus's hand brushed lightly against the strap of his bag, a movement as natural as breathing. He didn't reach for anything, he didn't need to. But to anyone watching closely, though the officers were not, that small motion hinted at readiness, control, and precision. A flash of his past battlefield discipline glimmered in his posture, his gaze, his unshakable calm. One wrong move from the cops, and Marcus could respond in ways they could not even imagine. The taller officer tried again, voice sharper now. "Hey! Move along! You've had enough time here." He stepped closer, thinking that intimidation alone would force compliance. Marcus's eyes flicked to the side, catching the subtle reflection of sunlight off a broken window. He noted it mentally, imagining angles, calculating distance, small actions that seemed irrelevant but could be vital in a real fight. The cops remained unaware that they were no longer in control. A faint breeze stirred the empty street, rustling discarded papers, and for a split second, Marcus allowed his mind to wander. He remembered a moment on a distant battlefield, waiting for the perfect shot. Every second had been a test of patience, every decision weighted with life or death. That same patience flowed through him now. He did not need to act. Not yet. But the officers, pressing closer with arrogance and ignorance, were giving him opportunities he would not waste. The younger cop laughed nervously, trying to mask the unease that Marcus had already detected. His movements were sloppy now, uncoordinated, betraying his lack of control. Marcus's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, not in malice, but in quiet amusement at the irony. Here were two men, armed with badges, thinking they had power over him, unaware that the real danger was silent, hidden, and far more capable than they could ever guess. Marcus's eyes locked onto the taller officer again. The man's stance was off, his balance slightly forward, weight uneven. A small, almost invisible detail, but to Marcus, it was everything. His mind raced through possible reactions, not out of fear, but out of preparedness. He had trained for years to read these signs, to predict outcomes, to remain calm while chaos unfolded. And right now, chaos was a heartbeat away. Suddenly, the younger officer reached toward Marcus, moving impulsively, thinking he could assert authority with a touch. Marcus's hand shifted instinctively, a subtle movement that was almost invisible. The officer froze mid-step, confusion flickering in his eyes. He couldn't explain it, couldn't place it, but something about Marcus radiated control and danger. The street held its breath, every second stretching longer, heavier. Marcus allowed his eyes to scan the horizon, noting a fire escape on a nearby building, a pile of crates near the alley, small openings that could provide cover or advantage. The cops were blind to these details, trapped in their assumptions, and Marcus's calm intensity amplified their ignorance. He didn't need to strike, didn't need to show force, the presence of hidden power was enough. For a brief moment, a car honked somewhere in the distance, breaking the silence. The officers reacted, flinching slightly, showing the cracks in their composure. Marcus leaned back, relaxed, but every muscle in his body was ready. He could sense the rising tension in them, the growing frustration, the subtle fear that they tried desperately to mask. And he knew that the next move, if provoked, would shift the balance entirely, and the cops had no idea what waited beneath his quiet exterior. The sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the street, illuminating Marcus's face. His eyes glinted with calm focus, a warning that was silent but deadly. The officers were too busy trying to intimidate him to notice the storm quietly gathering in his mind, the readiness in his posture, the deadly patience that had carried him through battlefields far worse than any city street. They were about to learn, if not by action then by consequence, that the man they underestimated was not just a homeless figure. They were staring at a force that could strike with precision and restraint beyond their comprehension. And in that quiet, tension-filled morning, Marcus sat still, watching, waiting, fully aware that the moment of reckoning was drawing nearer. Every breath, every movement, every glance was a silent promise. The hidden danger was real, and it would reveal itself at the perfect moment. The tension on the street had thickened, wrapping around the officers like an invisible rope. Marcus's calm gaze never wavered. He could see the impatience building in the taller officer, the younger one fidgeting, clearly unsure of what to do next. They thought they were in control, but Marcus had already set the rules of this encounter, silently, without violence, without a word. The taller officer made a sudden move, leaning closer as if to assert dominance. "I said move. Now." His voice was sharp, clipped, and Marcus could sense the adrenaline surging in him. But Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he shifted just slightly, a small motion that revealed nothing but projected an unmistakable presence. The officer froze. Something about Marcus's calm, measured posture made him hesitate. He could not read the man, could not predict his next move. Marcus's mind raced, weighing options with the precision of a soldier. He didn't need to strike. He didn't need to prove his skill. The situation itself was a battlefield, and he had already gained the upper hand simply by being who he was. The cop's arrogance and lack of awareness were their weakness, and Marcus intended to exploit it, but subtly, cleverly, without exposing himself to unnecessary risk. The younger officer, emboldened by his partner's aggression, stepped closer impulsively. "Hey! Don't act smart with us." Marcus's eyes flicked to him. A simple tilt of his head, a controlled shift in posture, and the officer froze mid-step, uncertainty creeping into his movements. It was a silent warning: one wrong action, one careless move, and consequences would come, not through brute force, but through precision and timing. A faint breeze rustled the discarded papers around Marcus's feet. He let it carry his awareness across the street, noting every detail: the angle of the sun, a loose brick, the reflection off a window. The officers were blind to these subtleties, focused only on intimidation, on aggression, unaware that Marcus had already predicted their movements. They had walked into a trap of perception, one where patience and calm were far deadlier than weapons. Marcus finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "You should rethink your approach," he said, almost conversationally. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was undeniable. The taller officer's jaw tightened, frustration visible, but he couldn't move closer, couldn't assert dominance without risking the unknown. Marcus had shifted the power balance without raising a hand. The younger officer stumbled slightly, tripping over a loose stone. Marcus didn't move. He simply watched, calm as ever. But the subtle control in his gaze was enough to make the officer feel exposed, vulnerable, and unsure. It was a twist neither cop had anticipated. The man they tried to intimidate was not reacting with fear, not even with aggression. He was asserting control through presence, awareness, and precision. Marcus allowed a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. Not cruelty, not pride, but a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the lesson was beginning to sink in. The cop's confidence was cracking. They had expected compliance. They had expected resistance. They had not expected intelligence, patience, and restraint wrapped in a calm exterior. And they could feel it, even if they could not articulate it. The sun had climbed higher now, casting a stronger light across the wet pavement. Shadows stretched long, outlining Marcus in a way that made him seem larger than life, almost like a figure stepping out of a story. The officers shifted nervously, realizing the imbalance but unsure how to fix it. Marcus's presence alone had become a weapon. No one could see the full extent of it yet, but the energy on the street had changed. Then, with the faintest gesture, a slight tilt of his head, the smallest movement of his hand, Marcus created space between himself and the officers. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was enough to force them back slightly, disrupt their rhythm, and give him the psychological advantage. They were now aware of something they couldn't explain. The tension that had been building in silence had revealed itself in the small, controlled action. Marcus leaned back slightly, crossing his arms loosely. He did not need to speak further. The cops could feel it. The twist was complete. The man they thought they could intimidate, the homeless figure they underestimated, was not only calm under pressure, he was the one in control. And for Marcus, this was only the beginning. The street had shifted, and he held the upper hand without a single act of violence. Every breath he took, every subtle movement, reinforced the lesson silently. The cops had entered a battlefield they could not see, and Marcus had already claimed victory in the quietest, deadliest way possible. The twist was not in action, but in awareness. The danger they ignored was real, precise, and invisible. And the officers would soon realize, far too late, that the man before them was far more than he appeared to be. The street remained quiet, yet the tension had shifted entirely. Marcus leaned slightly forward, observing the two officers with calm, piercing eyes. Their confidence had cracked, replaced by unease and uncertainty. Every step they took now felt measured, hesitant, as if they had begun to realize that the man before them was not ordinary. Marcus did not need to raise his voice or his hands, his presence alone communicated the consequences of misjudgment. The taller officer tried to assert authority again, his voice harsher this time. "We said move along. Now." Marcus's gaze stayed fixed, steady and unwavering. He didn't flinch, didn't retreat. Instead, he let the silence stretch, a quiet, heavy pause that spoke louder than words. The officer's frustration built visibly, but Marcus allowed it to simmer, his calm creating discomfort sharper than any threat. Marcus's eyes drifted toward a puddle on the street, the water reflecting the morning sun and the officer's confused expressions. He smiled faintly, not in mockery, but in subtle demonstration. Their arrogance, their assumptions, their ignorance of who they faced had put them in a position of vulnerability. Marcus was giving them a lesson, silently, without force, without violence. And the lesson was sinking in. The younger officer shifted, clearly struggling to maintain composure. He opened his mouth, tried to speak, but Marcus's steady gaze made words falter. It was as though the calm around Marcus had created its own authority, its own power. The officers had thought they could control the situation through intimidation, but Marcus had reversed it simply by existing fully aware, fully alert, fully unshaken. Marcus leaned back against the wall and let his hands rest lightly on his knees. Every subtle movement communicated control, confidence, and precision. The officers tried to regain dominance with small gestures, but each one was measured by Marcus, each hesitation recorded and assessed. They had no idea they were on the defensive, reacting instinctively to the quiet storm before them. For a brief moment, Marcus allowed himself to reflect, not on fear, not on anger, but on justice. He had survived countless battles where right and wrong blurred, where the innocent suffered while the arrogant thrived. Today, the lesson was clear and simple. He did not need to escalate to violence. He only needed to remain calm, precise, and unshakable. That alone was enough to assert justice silently. The taller officer finally took a step back, muttering under his breath. The younger one followed, his eyes flicking nervously between Marcus and the street beyond. Marcus's presence had forced them to recognize their own vulnerability, their own lack of awareness. They had tried to dominate, but domination without understanding had led them here, to hesitation, to doubt, to silent accountability. Marcus straightened slightly, his gaze softening just enough to show he was not cruel, only resolute. The officers could feel the weight of his experience pressing down upon them, a reminder that true power did not come from a badge or brute force but from control, patience, and awareness. The street, once a place of tension and confrontation, now bore the mark of his quiet authority. He rose slowly, each movement deliberate, unhurried. The officers flinched slightly at the shift in his posture, but Marcus made no threatening motion. He only walked past them, leaving a trail of subtle authority in his wake. Their frustration and embarrassment were tangible, but Marcus felt no satisfaction in humiliation. Justice, he knew, did not need celebration. It was in the awareness he had instilled, in the silent recognition that actions carried consequences, even without a single strike. The morning sun climbed higher, illuminating the wet pavement and reflecting in Marcus's calm eyes. He paused for a moment, looking back at the officers, giving them a final glance that spoke more than words could. They had underestimated him. They had ignored the lessons of caution, respect, and observation. And now they had felt the consequences, not through violence, but through the quiet, undeniable power of someone fully aware and fully in control. Marcus walked away, each step measured, calm, and purposeful. He did not need to look back. The street had shifted, the lesson had been delivered, and the officers would remember this encounter long after he was gone. Silence had been his weapon, patience had been his shield, and awareness had been his authority. And as he disappeared into the city, the quiet hero moved forward, leaving behind a street forever marked by the unseen power of a man who had survived the impossible and commanded respect without uttering a single threat. Marcus walked away from the street, the morning sun warming his face, though the chill of the night still clung to the pavement behind him. Each step was quiet, deliberate, carrying the weight of someone who had seen life and death, triumph and loss. The city bustled around him, oblivious to the events that had just unfolded, but Marcus did not need acknowledgement. His victory had been silent, his lesson delivered, and the world would carry on as it always did. He thought about the officers he had faced, their arrogance, their ignorance, and the subtle lesson they had received. No words, no violence, just awareness, patience, and quiet authority. It was a power few understood, a strength that did not need to be proven through aggression. Marcus had survived battlefields far deadlier than the city street, and yet the satisfaction he felt now was quiet, almost unnoticeable, because true triumph was measured by restraint, not action. The memories of his past returned gently, less like a storm now and more like whispers. Faces of fallen comrades, friends he had saved, moments of fear and courage, they all mingled together, shaping the man he had become. Homelessness, war, loss, and survival had forged a discipline that could turn the simplest street into a stage for quiet justice. And yet, despite the hardships, Marcus carried hope, a fragile, precious thing that gave him reason to keep moving forward. As he passed through the early crowds, he noticed small acts of kindness unnoticed by most, a woman feeding a stray cat, a man helping a child tie her shoe. They were fleeting moments, easily overlooked, yet they reminded him that the world was not entirely harsh. Even in hardship, even in streets filled with indifference, there were sparks of humanity. Marcus allowed himself a small, genuine smile. Hope, he realized, was not about grand victories or recognition. It was about the quiet choices, the strength to endure, the awareness to act when it truly mattered. He paused near a corner cafe, listening to the chatter of people unaware of his presence. The warmth of the sun on his shoulders felt like a small blessing, a gentle reminder that life continued despite struggle. Marcus thought of the moments ahead, the days on the streets, the challenges he would face, the battles both visible and unseen. But he also knew he had the strength to face them, the patience to endure, and the clarity to act when necessary. As he walked further into the city, a faint shadow moved behind him, unnoticed. Marcus did not flinch. If danger were present, he would sense it. His eyes scanned instinctively, but nothing required action. Still, the awareness remained, a constant companion. Life had taught him to be ready, always alert, but never to live in fear. He moved forward with confidence, carrying the quiet power of someone who had survived the impossible and learned that control, patience, and awareness were stronger than any weapon. The street behind him grew smaller in his mind, the officers fading into memory, their lessons silently etched into the morning air. Marcus allowed himself to reflect on the journey he had endured, the battlefields, the losses, the nights spent in shadows. Each hardship had led him here, shaping him into a man capable of commanding respect without confrontation. And as he disappeared into the crowd, the city moved around him unaware, carrying on with its noise and indifference, yet marked forever by the quiet hero who had walked among them. Marcus's thoughts drifted to the future, to moments yet unseen. He carried hope with him, not the hope for recognition, but the hope for survival, for integrity, for the chance to continue living with purpose despite the scars of the past. The world might overlook him, underestimate him, or fail to understand him, but Marcus had learned that true strength lay in awareness, patience, and quiet resolve. And so he walked on, the sun climbing higher, lighting the streets with possibility. Each step was a testament to endurance, each breath a reminder of resilience. Marcus was more than a man on the streets. He was a survivor, a silent guardian, a force that moved through life with precision and purpose. And though the city would never know his full story, he carried it within him, a story of hope, reflection, and the quiet power of someone who refused to be broken.